Hi there, welcome back for another episode of the Mind Your Liberty podcast, where we're looking at liberty, what it is, why you should care about it, and how to defend it. Today I'm really excited. I've got a guest in observance of Veterans Day. This is a special guest I've wanted to have on for a few years. Since I started the podcast, I've been meaning to have this, and this year, since I'm doing conversations on the podcast, it worked out. He agreed to share his testimony with us and my audience, and so I am excited for you all to get to listen in. And I think I certainly learned things. I don't know if he didn't share them the first time around, but I learned stuff. And so this is my brother in Christ, Ron Aguiar, and he's a Vietnam veteran, and more than that, he's my hero, one of my heroes. And he kind of mentored me as a young man. He just invited me to go mountain climbing with him. He was bagging 14ers out in Colorado. He invited me on several of them. He'd take me, have me come up to his mountain chalet up in Conifer, Colorado, and chop firewood, and kind of showed me what a good example of an older, godly man could be. And he's just been faithful over the years, and he's a role model, I'd say. And guys, you need to be, if you're a father, you need to be that for your kids, but also as we'll talk about at the end of the podcast, at the end of our conversation, I think it's so important to be sure and share that with someone else. Maybe someone doesn't have a dad to be that. I did. I thank God. My dad's another one of my heroes. But young men need other guys besides their dad to look up to and to see what it's like, what it means to be a man. And Ron was that for me, and it sounds like he's still doing that type of thing. So I really appreciate him. I'm honored to have him on the podcast. And so today, without further ado, Ron did say after we finished recording, he mentioned that I might want to put a disclaimer or just a notice out there that there is some intense content in here, because he was a Vietnam vet and he's sharing some of those memories with us. And, so just be advised that there's potentially disturbing content in here. If you're sensitive to what you think the Vietnam scenario is going to be, then maybe pass this one up. Also, this is a long-winded podcast. This is a record breaker for me, but I didn't cut anything out. I thought it was all beneficial. I learned. I enjoyed listening to him. It's an honor for me to have this conversation with him and get to record it and share it with you all. So I thought I'd just pass that on. And listen to it as you can, and I hope it's beneficial to you, and we'll make a connection into liberty there towards the end. I think I might have already done that. So without further ado, here's the conversation, and I'm not going to do an outro bumper, so we'll see you at the next podcast. All right, so I'm here with my good friend Ron Aguiar, and this is a guy that I've looked up to pretty much all my life. I grew up in the church he attended, and I attended I was a young man. And Ron shared his testimony in the youth group when I was in the youth group at this church, and it made an impact on me, and it was just a wonderful story of God's grace and redemption. And so we're going to connect that to liberty as the conversation naturally flows, but I've asked him to start out by sharing his testimony. And so enjoy. And Ron, you're on.
Okay. You want me, Andrew, you just want me to go ahead and start talking about myself and get in my testimony?
Yeah. So I think that's probably what we should do. Yeah.
Okay. All right. First of all, I'd like to say, it's only by the grace of God that I am here. I did not grow up in a Christian family. I was sorry to say, um, uh, I didn't know if there was a God or not. Um, I had some doubts about, if I knew you were a Christian and we were talking about God, I would say, sure, I believe in God, But yet, if I knew you were not a Christian, I was talking to you, and you asked me if I believe in God, I'd probably say, well, I don't know. I've never seen God perform a miracle, and I've never had any personal experience with him, so I don't think there is a God. Um, but I do remember um, in ninth grade, the the Vietnam War was just starting up. We had just started sending advisors to Vietnam, and I was thinking, if I lived in America and had all the freedoms in America that I've been able to enjoy, I think if I was asked to serve my country and go in the military, I think I should be willing to do that because I've been able to reap all the benefits of those who served in the military before me, and I think it would be my obligation to serve my country and say that I'm willing to go in the military. And
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam was a very unpopular war.
Yeah.
And it was a 10-year war, and they gave because it was very unpopular. Well, I guess it's not really because it was unpopular, but it wasn't like uh, World War II where we had an aggressor. If Hitler wasn't stopped, he'd probably try to conquer the world. And
Right.
we hadn't been attacked like at Pearl Harbor during Vietnam. We were sending troops over to a far-off country that I had never heard of before the war started, before we started sending advisors. And when I started hearing about it, President Kennedy was still alive and he was president. And when he was assassinated, I remember I was my sophomore year in high school, and I was going to biology class. I just got done with lunch, and I was on my way to biology class, and I heard that President Kennedy was assassinated. And that was a big experience, memorable experience for me because
Oh, yeah.
I loved America, and our president had been killed, and he had sent advisors to Vietnam, and that was the Special Forces advisors. They went there. It wasn't where we had sent the military as a armed forces to Vietnam.
Yeah.
So I remember the song, the Green Beret, the song, the Green Beret, where it came out in 1965, and it was a very popular song. And they looked like they started up the draft, and President Kennedy had been assassinated, and Lyndon Baines Johnson became president, and he started sending troops to Vietnam, and then the Special Forces song came out, and it really meant a lot to me to hear the song about the Special Forces, how they were willing to serve their country.
Mm-hmm.
And, I wanted to serve my country. I didn't want to be a draft dodger. There were people that just started going to Canada because they didn't believe in the Vietnam War, and the hippie movement was very popular, and people started burning their draft cards and started burning the American flag. And I I was totally against that. Even though I was not a Christian, I was totally against that. I mean, I loved America, and I knew I had the benefit of men that had gone to serve our country and had died for our country and given us the freedoms and the liberty that we have today.
Sure.
I wanted to serve my country, yet I did not agree with the Vietnam War. I didn't agree with President Johnson sending troops to a far-off country that we had never heard of before and fighting a war for somebody who we had never known or never even knew existed.
Yeah.
But the big thing, the idea that went around was the domino theory. The domino theory was, we didn't believe in communism and in Southeast Asia. If we didn't stop communism in Vietnam, then it'd be like dominoes. The other Southeast Asia countries would fall like dominoes. Laos and Cambodia and
Sure.
those other countries would become communist. And later on, those countries never did. Well, I guess Cambodia is communist today, but it wasn't where once Vietnam fell and the other countries had fallen.
Sure.
Never did happen to that. Of course,
Different turn of events for them.
That's right. The Korean War was where we were fighting against North Korea, and then the Chinese got involved, who were definitely communists.
Sure.
And so they also, when I graduated from high school, I thought I would like to go to college, like the opportunity to be able to go to college. And they gave a draft deferment for students. You could become 2S if you went to college, as long as you were in college, actively pursuing a degree, you couldn't be drafted. So the draft was on, and a lot of people my age were getting drafted.
A lot of people suddenly went to college.
Yes, that's right. My stepfather was a World War II veteran, and he had multiple sclerosis, so he was totally disabled. And I was able to go on the GI Bill for a year. So I got a year of college through him.
Oh, wow.
Excuse me. So I went to college, and I was living in Bemidji, Minnesota, up in northern Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And it was my hometown, and my mom had moved to Minneapolis. Actually, she moved to St. Paul, the Twin Cities, and Bemidji was like 250 miles north of that. And that's where I grew up in junior high and I think 5th and 6th grade.
That's your hometown, Bemidji, Minnesota?
Yes, uh-huh.
I did not know that. There's a guy that got called to be a pastor in Bemidji, Minnesota.
Yes, Northwood.
Chuck Nicholson.
Yes, Brother Nicholson's son.
Yeah, Bob Nicholson's son, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and we stopped there and went to church last time I was in Minnesota. We attended his church.
Oh, okay.
And
gotcha.
So that was where I grew up, and then I did graduate from St. Paul Central High School in 1966. I felt like my hometown was really. I knew everybody in town. It was a small town, 10,000 people.
Oh wow!
And I had a lot of high school friends, and had a lot of relatives that lived there. And so I decided to go to Bemidji State College, and I did, and I was able to get the GI Bill. The only problem was that my best friends lived there also, and I was not the best student. And so after the first semester, I had a grade point average of 0.96. So I was definitely a D minus average. I think I had all flunking class. I was flunking all the classes except for one class, which was a history class. I got a C in that. And so they asked me not to come back the next semester. In other words, I was put on probation. I had to stay out a semester, and then I could come back. Actually, they were quarters. They were not called semesters. They were called quarters. So I stayed out a quarter, and then I went back into college again. And the second quarter, I did do better. I did get a D average, but the D average was not well enough to stay in college. And so I knew I was going to be drafted. And I really didn't want to go to Vietnam. I didn't believe in the Vietnam War, just sending men over there to fight for a country I'd never heard of. So,
right.
I started thinking about it, and finally, Friday the 13th of 1967, I decided I was going to join. And I joined the United States Army. And to join, you enlisted for 3 years. If I was going to be drafted, I would only be for 2 years, but I would go to Vietnam.
Yeah.
If I was drafted. And so I went ahead and joined for 3 years, and I ended up going to Vietnam anyway. So wasn't too smart of a thing. You know, most people were going to Vietnam. That was the main place they were sent. And when I went to the recruiter's office, he asked me what I would like to get into, what I wanted to be, and I told him, I think I would like to be a cook. I had worked in restaurants. My mom was she worked in a restaurant as a cook, and she worked for a chef. And it was a nice restaurant, and she worked for the chef, and I was a salad boy, and I would make the salads, cut up the carrots, no lettuce, and all that kind of stuff for the salads. I really liked that job, and I thought I would like to be a cook. So the recruiter said, "Well, that's no problem. You know, let me go get the paperwork, and we can sign you up today." I said, "Okay." So then he left, and I was sitting there in his office, and I was looking at the posters on the wall, and I seen these posters of these guys jumping out of airplanes, paratroopers. You know, they were jumping out, and then I seen another picture where these guys had camouflage on their face, and they're in a life raft, and they had their rifles. You know, they're submerged in the water, and they were going
commandos.
Yeah. So I thought that would be pretty cool. And so he came back, and he said, "Well, here's the paperwork for a cook." And I said, "Well, could I be a cook and still go go airborne?" He said, "Oh, sure, that no problem." You know, I didn't know that to be airborne, you automatically were put in the infantry. And if you went in the infantry, you obviously were going to go to Vietnam. So it was a no-brainer. I joined to be an airborne cook, and he said, "You'll be an airborne cook." And the only thing I ever cooked was in Vietnam. I would heat up my C rations with a tablet, C4 tablet. It was a piece of explosive, but you just put a match to it and it burned real fast and heat up your can of food.
That's the only thing you ever cooked.
That's the only thing I ever cooked. But after I went in the Army and found out what the mess hall was like, I was glad that I was never a cook, even though I went into the infantry and I was a paratrooper. It sure was a lot more glamorous, jumping out of airplanes and being in the infantry and being able to shoot all the different weapons.
Sure.
The M16 and the M14 and the M60 machine gun and
Oh yeah.
caliber machine gun. So, our specialty was light weapons, and so that's what I did. And then I found out after, well, you go to basic training, which was 8 weeks of basic training, and then after basic training, the infantry, they have what they call advanced infantry training. So I went to that, and that was another 8 weeks. And I got my orders to go to Fort Benning, Georgia, and I thought the orders were to go to jump school. And we went to Fort Benning, and we got off the trucks at Fort Benning, Georgia, thinking we were going to go to jump school to become paratroopers. And we were standing in line formation, and it was probably 100 guys, and they called all of us. Everybody got called off. They called off their name except for 3 of us, and 3 of us were still standing in formation. And the sergeant said, "You guys are going to go to non-commissioned officer school." That was a program that if you were selected to go to non-commissioned officer school, you could become a sergeant. And you would get the rank of Sergeant E5, and you would go 90 days. You would go to non-commissioned officer school, and you come out as a Sergeant E5. At the time, I was an E2 private. I was a private, and but it was strictly a volunteer program, and well, they volunteered me for it because I didn't volunteer to go to non-commissioned officer school, because that was guaranteed that you're going to go to Vietnam. Find that. And so I was upset about that. I hadn't volunteered for it, and they signed me up. So the sergeant told me, he said, "Well, when you get to your company, go see your company commander and see if he can get you out, because if you haven't volunteered for it, you don't have to go to it." So I went to see my company commander when I got there, and he was Special Forces. He had his Green Beret. He was a captain. I went in and talked to him, and he said, "Well, in order for you to go to Special Forces, I was interested also in going to Special Forces," and I told him that I was interested in doing that. And he said, "Well, in order to be able to do that, you would have to re-up because you don't have enough time in the military." And he told me, he says, "Why don't you go ahead and start in the school, non-commissioned officer school?" He says, "It won't be so bad. It's only 90 days, and you have the same training as what the officers have when they go to officer candidate school. It's very good training. And chances are, even if you don't go to non-commissioned officer school, chances are you're going to go to Vietnam anyway." And he says, "At least you'll be a sergeant, you'll get better pay, and it'll be better for you."
Right.
And so I decided to stay and go ahead and go into the school. And I got into the school, and it was a very good school, very good training. Prepared us very well for Vietnam. They taught us about booby traps and how to disarm booby traps, and how to lead men, and set the example for your men, and taught you a lot of discipline, and gave you, a lot of times you go to classroom and they would put you in a life action situation, like they would say, okay, you're in Vietnam and you're setting up an ambush, and you just blew the ambush and you've killed 3 enemy. Well, what are you going to do? And then you make a decision, and then they say, well, you did that, and you're being attacked by an enemy force of approximately 30 people, and they're attacking your squad of 10 men. And what's your reaction? And then they would give you multiple choices what you should do. And you pick out what would be the best thing, and then they would explain to you, what the right answer was, and then if you picked that answer, that you made a good choice. For example, if the enemy was attacking you and you were under fire and you were outnumbered, and you would lay down a base of fire, and you would try to have superior firepower and take control of the situation. And then they would tell you, you made a good choice. Or if you decided the best thing to do is to fall back and try to escape from the enemy, why that wasn't such a good choice. And so it was really good training.
Sounds like it.
For situations in Vietnam, and then you went through a obstacle course. I remember one training where they would give you different objects. They would give you a tire and a piece of rope and a 3-foot piece of board, and you had to walk across this 10-foot bank wall, and you had to try to figure out how you were going to be able to get across this wall. It was too far to jump, and so there would be like 3 of us, and we had to try to figure out how we were going to get across this ditch without falling into the water. It was supposed to be alligators in there and stuff, and so you try to figure out how you'd be able to get across. And to tell you the truth, I can't remember how we made it across, what we did to get across, but we made it across. And then they would give us another situation where you were in Korea, and you it was 20 below zero, and you had four trucks, and 3 of them would not start. There was only 1 truck that would start, and it started, and all you had extra was a piece of hose, a 2-inch hose, and it was 6 feet long. And how could you get the other truck started with just a rubber hose?
Huh.
So the object was, what your right answer was, you to take the hose and put it over the exhaust pipe, and then your exhaust would take the other end and put it on the engine of one of the other trucks, and the warm air from your engine would heat the engine of the other trucks or warm it up enough that engine would start.
And this was all in NCO training.
Yes.
That you're talking about. Okay.
Right. So they gave us these situations, and you were supposed to be able to solve the problems,
Yeah.
Another one was where you were stuck. I remember you were stuck in the swamp, and maybe in the jungle or whatever, and you had a 50-foot rope, and you had a spare tire, and how could you get out? And so, let's see, I think you had you took the tire, you dug a hole, you buried the tire, you tied your rope to your front fender and the tire, and I can't remember if we did we have a winch on the truck. You must have had a winch on the truck. You buried the tire in the ground, and you ran the winch, the winch, and so the tire buried gave you enough pull on the truck to pull you out of the mud that you're able to get out. So that's another one.
Good trick.
That was the trick, right? So I went to NCO school, and then after I graduated, it was 90 days. They call it shake and bake school because they had back then the new chicken had come out where you could just take it and you had the ingredients in the plastic bag and you put the chicken in there and you just shake it up and you put it in the oven, you bake it, and it would come right out of the oven, all cooked and everything. It was really, really good. It was called shake and bake chicken.
Huh.
So that's what our nickname was. They call us shake and bakes because we go to this school 90 days and you go on as a private and you come out in 90 days and you're a shake and bake. You're all done.
You're a sergeant.
That's right. So so they call us 90-day wonders. So we graduated from that, and so I made sergeant in the Army after only being in the Army for 7 months. Normally you would have to, if you went in the normal enlistment, 3 years. If you re-upped after 3 years, you might be able to make Sergeant E5. Well, I was able to make it in 7 months by going through NCO school.
Huh.
I don't know. Maybe they messed up by picking me, but anyway, they picked me and I graduated from it. So then after that, I went to Fort Lewis, Washington. It was on-the-job training for training other soldiers that were going to Vietnam. And it was their advanced infantry training that I had just graduated from before I went to NCO school. And so they're going to go to 8 weeks of advanced infantry training they had the same training that I had before I went to NCO school. And
okay.
I was their sergeant, and I had 9 men in my squad, so there was a 10-man squad. And so we prepared those young men. Most of them are ages 17 to 20 years old. And at that time, I was 20 years old myself.
Wow.
And so I was their sergeant for 2 months, and then they went to Vietnam, and I got my orders to go to jump school. So then I went to jump school to be a paratrooper 3 weeks, and then after my 3 weeks, I got a month's leave, and then I went to Vietnam as a Sergeant E5. And I was assigned up by the DMZ, the Demilitarized Zone. At that time, there was a boundary between North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and there was an imaginary line at the 45th parallel that divided North and South Vietnam, the 45th parallel
Okay.
latitude line, 45 degrees north latitude, or
Sure.
maybe south latitude. I can't remember. It must have been south because it was hot.
South. Yeah, south of the equator.
Right. Because north, that's right. Because north, it's up like 45 degrees north, I think, is in Minnesota also. North latitude.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, I went to Vietnam, and I went to search school. So when you first get there, you go through training for a week, and they process your paperwork, and then you train some more. But mostly it was just to get used to the humidity. It's so hot. 120.
Sure.
Really very hot in the jungle. And then I was sent up north by the VMZ to Camp Evans, which was the 3rd Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division. And I was going to, I was a paratrooper, and the 101st Airborne, they were still called airborne, but the helicopter, that was the helicopter. They started using the helicopter extensively to carry troops into combat. Before that,
Sure.
like World War II, the 101st Airborne, they jumped out of airplanes into Normandy, whereas the helicopter could take 5 or 6 men in. They could drop you off in the jungle, and all 5 would be there at once. Whereas when they jumped you from an airplane, you'd be scattered all over. And you might,
more tactical.
Yes, exactly right.
And did you practice jumping out of helicopters in jump school?
Yes, yes, I did. Yep.
Okay.
And so when I got to Vietnam, one of the men I was going out to the field where my company was. I was assigned to Bravo Company, 2nd of 506 Infantry. And if you've ever watched the movie The Band of Brothers or read the book The Band of Brothers, Mel Gibson.
I've seen some of them. I haven't watched them all or read the book.
Okay, it's very good book. The movie is the most accurate movie I've seen on Vietnam. So anyway, I went to the 101st Airborne. They went the 1st Cavalry Unit and 101st Airborne became air mobile. Instead of jumping on airplanes, they air assaulted in helicopters. And so our mission in Vietnam, basically, we would have the vast majority of the time we would have search and destroy missions, where the helicopters would take us into the jungle and drop us off, and we would search for the enemy, try to find the enemy, and then destroy them. And that was usually our mission. And so the helicopters, typically we would go in 5 helicopters at a time, and it would be like the 5 of diamonds. The 5, it has 2 helicopters in front, 2 in the back, and 1 in the middle. And that's the way our formation was when we assaulted. And then just before you went into the jungle, one helicopter would break off, and he would be the first one in, and then the next helicopter would be right behind him. So as the helicopter come in, it would hover over the ground. Very seldom did it ever land in the ground. Sometimes they would land if they felt like it was a secure area, then they might land. But usually they would hover over the ground, and then we'd jump out of the helicopter, and it might be 3 or 4 feet. Sometimes it was 10 or 12 feet, and it was a hard jump because you had 800-pound backpack on your back, and if you jump in 10 or 12 feet up, the rock would come up over your head, and you'd hit the ground, and it was. But sometimes you hit your head,
Sheesh.
So, but usually it was maybe 2 or 3 feet off the ground, and you just jump out of the helicopter. And then the first helicopter in, you would have 5 guys get off all at once, and you make a little tiny circle, and then the next helicopter would be right behind it. And as your helicopter took off, the next helicopter was landing. And there was a saying. They said the life expectancy of a helicopter pilot in Vietnam was 7 seconds, because that's usually how long it took them to come in and hover over the ground and drop off the troops and then get out. They were sitting ducks because they would be high up in the air, you'd see them. When you're on the ground, you could see them coming in, and
Right.
They were very vulnerable to shoot. They were very easy to shoot down. So
Wow.
that's how they would get us all on the ground. Then we would make our perimeter as each helicopter come in. Our perimeter would get bigger and bigger and bigger until we had the whole company, or if it was a platoon of 30 men, typically a company was between 100 to 130 men, and you'd have 3 platoons in a company. So you'd have 30 or 40 men in a platoon. And then in the platoon, we would have 3 squads. So they're 10-man squads, and you'd have 3 of them in a platoon, and then you'd have 3 platoons in a company.
And each squad had its own sergeant?
Right. Exactly
Okay.
right. Sergeant E5. So that's what I was. So I was a squad leader. I had those 9 men in my squad. And so that's how we operated in the jungle, or a lot of times it was in the rice paddies. When I first went to Vietnam, that's what we did. We operated in the rice paddies. And the first day I went out to the field, I was going to Bravo Company, the company I was with. And as I mentioned, that was the same unit that the Band of Brothers, the movie The Band of Brothers, it was the same unit, same battalion that were in the movie. We were soldiers once and young with Mel Gibson. But anyway, that was World War II. They were in World War II. Same unit in Vietnam was my unit.
Okay.
So my first day going out into meet my company was out in the rice paddies, it was in the highlands of Vietnam, and so they had rice paddies, and there was it was very flat, and they would have like checkerboards, and the rice paddies would have dikes around them to hold the water in, and the rice would grow in these rice paddies, and it would be anywhere from knee deep to up to your neck, depending on how much it rained.
Wow.
And
I didn't know they got that deep.
yeah, I remember sometimes walking the rice paddies and the water was right up to your, you put your head up in the air and the water was right up to your chin, just below your mouth level.
Golly, and you had that pack on all the time, right?
So we'd have a 80 to 100-pound pack, and we'd have our weapon. A machine gunner would have his machine gun, and
Wow.
At least 1,000 rounds of ammunition he would carry. 1 to 3,000 rounds of ammunition that he would carry besides his pack and all of his gear. So during the monsoons, it was you had to be really careful that you didn't step in over your head. And then we would be walking during the monsoons. We'd be walking on the rice paddy, the rice paddy normally would be like maybe 2 or 3 feet higher than the water level. But during the monsoons, it was all water, so you didn't even see the rice paddies. You just felt them with your feet as you walked, and you kind of walked along, sticking your foot out there, making sure you didn't step off the rice paddy because you'd be in over your head if you did. And if a guy stepped off, he would go in and it was over his head, and his buddy you'd have to grab your guy next to you or behind you, and try to pull him back up on the rice paddy. So it could be pretty scary. But anyway, back to my story. The first day I'd just been in Vietnam, maybe a week or 10 days, and I was going out to meet my company. And they flew me out in a helicopter out in the rice paddies, where the enemy was. They were searching for the Viet Cong at that time. It was Viet Cong territory. The Viet Cong were farmers during the day, and typically they would fight at night. And they wore the black pajamas, and they carried the weapon. And so I flew out to where my company was, and it was on a little bit of like a little knoll, and it was normally would be a hill, but it was like maybe 3 feet above the water, and it was just a high spot, and the whole company was there, and it was maybe half of a football field size, and the helicopters land there and drop me off, and as they dropped me off, one of these privates come running up to me and said, "Hey, Sergeant Aguiar," and it was one of the guys that was in my squad at Fort Lewis when he was going through AIT training. I was a sergeant just before he went to Vietnam, and so he went to Vietnam when he got done with his advanced infantry training, and I went to jump school for 3 weeks to be a paratrooper, and so he had been in Vietnam for 3 weeks ahead of me. So it was one of my men that was in my squad when I was back in the States. And so we talked, and then I told him that I'd talk to him in the morning. And so the next morning, we started marching, walking single file through the rice paddies. And we were walking on the dike, trying to stay on the dike. Because if you stepped out, like I said, if you stepped off the dike, you'd go in over your head.
Yeah.
And so we were walking, and he was point man. He was the first man in the column, and he was leading the company. And we marched all day long, and then in the evening, usually like maybe around 6 o'clock or something like that, we would start making camp for the night. We call that a night defensive position. We call it NDP, night defensive position. And so the infantry, they always try to defend themselves on high ground. You always try to get the high ground because it's easier to defend from high ground. If you have say you're on a hill and that's all low ground below you, that's the most tactical advantage, is to have high ground, because otherwise, that way your enemy has to attack uphill, which makes it much harder to attack uphill than it is to go downhill or flat. So we always try to set up our night defensive position for the night on the high ground. So as we were walking through the rice paddies, we came to this big hill, and it was probably 100 feet above the rice paddies. And so we were making going to climb up the top of the hill and set up our night defensive position on top of the hill. And as we were walking up the hill, single file, Private Dodd, the man that I had mentioned that I'd seen him in, he was in my squad at Fort Lewis back in the States. He was the point man. He was the first man in the column, and he stepped on a bouncing Betty booby trap. It was a pressure release mine where you step on it, as long as your foot's on it and you hold it down, the pressure down, it wouldn't go off. But when you took your foot off, and then the mine would jump up, it was spring loaded, and it would pop up in the air about 3 feet, and it would go off, and it was very deadly.
Wow.
So it would pop up and then explode about chest high. So he stepped on
yeah.
when he took his foot off. It bounced up and exploded, and he had a sucking chest wound. He was wounded, and a sucking chest wound is when you get a hole in your chest, and you're not breathing through your mouth, but the hole in your chest is where you're getting the air, so you're sucking air in
bubbles.
So it's usually what happens is the person starts swallowing their own blood, and so they strangle. They die by strangling as the blood gets caught in their throat and they strangle. So what you do in that situation is you try to block that hole in the chest so that they won't breathe through that hole, so they'll breathe normally, like through their their mouth, or their nose. So usually what you would do is put a piece of plastic over that to cover that hole so that they won't be breathing through that hole in their chest.
Right. Yeah.
He had that sucking chest wound and he died. So I had been in the field a day, and somebody I knew got killed. He was dead.
Wow.
A big awakening for me to realize, my first day in Vietnam, and somebody I know got killed. So it was
wow,
a big realization that this is life or death situation. And I'd just like to back up now. Why did I go? I could have went to Canada like a lot of draft dodgers did, or I could have tried to be a conscientious objector, or I could have burned my draft card, and went to jail. Well, I had all those freedoms. I had the liberty to be able to live the way I wanted to, and had the freedoms of being able to go where I wanted to go and do the things I wanted to do, and had the opportunity to go to school and college, and had a lot of freedoms as an American, and I felt like it was my duty. And when I signed that paper and raised my right hand to take the oath, I felt like it was my duty. I had volunteered to serve my country, and it was my destiny. I had trained to go to Vietnam, and I trained to be a sergeant in Vietnam in charge of 10 men. So I felt like my destiny was to go to Vietnam and serve my country and try to do the best I can and be the best soldier I could. And I felt that was, my duty in life. And so I was going to make the best of it. And I wouldn't say I was the greatest sergeant. I wasn't the worst sergeant. I was a mediocre sergeant, I feel. But I was willing to put my life on the line and serve my country the best I could. And if I had to die for somebody else, if I could save another man's life, I was willing to do that. If he didn't have to die and I could do something to save his life, I was willing to do it. But yet I was going to try to protect myself and do the best I could to keep myself alive also,
Sure.
I wanted to go back to the States.
Yeah, I bet.
Live a normal life, and have all the freedoms. But yet I felt like if there was a God, that's what God would put me there for. And so my first 9 months in Vietnam, I never seen the enemy. I never got an opportunity to shoot at anybody. We would get mortars, or we would get ambushed. I wouldn't say ambush, sniper fire, not an ambush. An ambush would be where a bunch of the enemy would be hiding, waiting for somebody to come by, and then spring an ambush on them. And that's a lot of times. I wouldn't say most of the times, but if we were out in the field, say 3 or 4 days, one of those days we would set up an ambush.
Okay.
And our ambushes were usually squad size, 10-man size. Like I, as the sergeant, with the 9 men in my squad, we would set up an ambush that night. We would go out from the perimeter from where everybody else is, and we would go out and set up an ambush and hide along a trail or a logical place where the enemy might come through. It might be a ravine, or it could be a canyon. Not too many canyons in Vietnam. However, sometimes there would be like a place in the mountains where you would have rocks on both sides, on two sides. Like a trail going through where we would set up an ambush. But most of the time we would hide in the bushes on a ridge line, or it might be a trail junction where the enemy had trails, and there would be a junction where two trails met, and we could, if you've seen tracks, or if the grass was beaten down a lot, you knew that the enemy had been there recently. So you could read the signs and tell that the enemy had traveled there, or
Yeah.
we got intel that the enemy had been there. We had long range reconnaissance patrols. They would be patrols that would go out on patrol, and they would just search for the enemy. They wouldn't make contact. They would just try to spy on the enemy and see what the enemy's doing, and then report back and tell higher up, our commanders, how big a force it was, and what they were doing, and where they were traveling. And then
Right.
they would, our company or our platoon would go out, and we would try to find the enemy. And our intelligence told us that they were traveling along this river. And so we would set up an ambush along this river or whatever it was. And so usually about, we had three squads. So usually once every 3 or 4 nights, we would be out all night on ambush. And typically when you're on ambush, you would be 50% on alert. In other words, you would have buddies, and one of you would be sleeping and the other one would be on guard. And then you would do that for an hour, and then the other guy would be on guard for an hour, and you'd sleep. That's when you were on ambush. Now, if you weren't on ambush, you were in the perimeter, and you would be on guard. So if there's 3 guys in your position, typically a squad, there would be 9 men, and then I would be the 10th person. So there would be 3 positions. There would be 2 positions that would have 3 men apiece. That would be 6. And then the 3rd position would have 4 men. It would be the sergeant would be in that position. And so if you were on a position with 3 men, and then once every 3 hours you would pull guard, and you would rotate out during the night. So each man would pull an hour of guard, and then he'd wake up the next man, and then he would wake up the next man, and then it would be your turn once every 3 hours.
Sure.
Where there was 4 of us on guard, and then you would have guard once every 4 hours. But when you were on ambush, you were on guard half the night. Every other hour you were on guard.
Yeah.
Looking for the
doesn't make for a good night's rest.
Definitely not. And so typically what would happen, we would be walking on rice paddies, or we would be walking along a river, and there'd be a sniper, and he would see us. You could see during the daytime, you could see across the rice paddies, you could see a long ways, and you could see there's 30 men walking across wide open ground. It's just about all water, and it's very easy to see American GIs walking across the rice paddies, and so they would figure out what's the most likely place we would go, and then they would set up an ambush or just set up a sniper, and he would sit there and he'd wait for us to come along.
Wow.
We knew that the most likely places where ambushes were, so we would not purposely go to where it would be a good place for an ambush. So we would go out of the way so that we wouldn't be ambushed. So my year in Vietnam, I was never ambushed. We didn't allow the enemy to ambush us, or else we were just fortunate enough. By God's grace, we didn't get ambushed. A lot of companies, a lot of Americans got ambushed, and sometimes you could be the best soldiers out there, and you could still be ambushed, even though you did everything right. You still might get ambushed, But just by now, I can say by God's grace, we were never ambushed, because the worst thing you can be in is an ambush, because when somebody's shooting at you, your first reaction is to get down and try to hide behind the rock, or try to hide behind a bank or a log or anything, get behind something. But in an ambush, that's the worst thing you can do, because the enemy will just pick you off. You're laying on the ground. The enemy knows where you are, and so they'll just wait till they can see you, and then they'll shoot you. But the best thing to do in an ambush is to stand up and attack your enemy, and you do that in force, and you have enough guys attacking. Yes, some of the people are going to get shot because the enemy's shooting at you, but when you have 30 men or 50 men running at you and you're shooting at them, even though you have a machine gun, all these guys are running at you, it's pretty hard to shoot them all. And yet, that's the best defense in an ambush, is to stand up and run ahead and charge ahead and try to knock out that machine gun or whoever's shooting at you. And sometimes with all these guys run, if you're attacking, the enemy sees you attacking, sometimes they'll just get scared and they'll run. They'll get up and run, even though they have the advantage. So really, typically the worst thing you can do in an ambush is to lay down and let the enemy shoot at you, and just lay down a base of fire and be shooting with machine gun at you all the time. They eventually pick you off. And so our best ambush would be an L-shaped ambush, where the ambush would be shaped like an L. So you would have the L, the bottom of the L, you would have men laying there in the bottom of the L, and then as the top of the L, you can imagine an L-shaped ambush. You'd be shooting. Let's say if we're going north and south, you would have men lying along in a northerly direction, and so they would be shooting towards the south, and then there would be men east and would say they're lined up west. They would be shooting east, and so in your L-shaped ambush, you would have men shooting in a southerly direction and also in an easterly direction at the same time. And you're not shooting at each other.
Right, yeah.
You're in an L formation. And that's the most effective, because your bullets are crossing each other. So
sure.
where was kind of an L-shaped ambush. It's the worst kind of ambush you can be in. And so that's the kind of stuff that we did. And then in May of, I was in Vietnam from October of 68 until October of 1969. That's when I was in Vietnam. So from October until May, we had been in the highlands, and also we had been in the rice paddies, and then right along the coast, the South China Sea, along the coast. For about a month there, we were right along the coast, not right on the water, but just maybe a quarter of a mile inland, where it was still loose sand, and we would patrol along the beaches, but we didn't patrol along the ocean, but it was just a little bit inland, and it would be still jungle and sand. And so that part of my tour was where we were along on the beach in the beaches, and so it would be like sand dunes, is where we would they have sand dunes, and then there would be palmetto bushes and very very thick hedgerows where the jungle would be growing and stuff, and there would be rice paddies, and then you would get farther inland, and then it would be rice paddies and the highlands. If you think back, Andrew, when you were living around Denver, Denver was pretty flat. You get on the plains, and like Aurora would be real flat.
Yeah.
And then you get around Lakewood area, and you'd have the highlands. You'd have the Front Range. Lake would be
sure.
Hilly, and so that's what it would be, that kind of terrain in Vietnam also. You would have the beach, and then you would have the rice paddies, and then you have the highlands. Then as you farther get more inland, you would have the mountains. And
okay.
Now most of Vietnam, I think the widest part of Vietnam, South Vietnam, was 37 miles wide. Very long, very narrow country. Now, North and South Vietnam, it's all called Vietnam. Now, it's about 2,000 miles long, and typically it's 25 to 30 miles wide. So it's a very long, narrow country. And so for you to go from the beaches to the mountains, you could very easily do that in 10, 15 minutes in a helicopter, traveling in a helicopter. So after the mountains, I got there when it was during the rainy season. And when I first got there, it was, I would say it rained probably every 3 days. But the monsoon, the center of the monsoon was when it would rain every day. And it would pour down rain for 24 hours straight, just as hard as it could rain. I mean, you could sit a bucket outside and you could fill that bucket up in no time with rain, and it would just pour. You can think of Noah and his ark, when it was raining.
Yeah.
Days and 40 nights. Well, in Vietnam, might rain for 3 days straight, just pouring down rain. And then it would quit for maybe a day, and then it would start raining again. And so the roads would be flooded.
And did you guys go on patrol during that super rainy season?
Yes, yeah, we would be on patrol, and we wouldn't go out in the rice paddies because that would be way over our heads. We would be more toward where the beach was and those sand dunes I was telling you about.
Yeah,
we would be patrolling those sand dunes, and either that or else we'd be in the highlands, where it was high enough to where it wouldn't be over our heads.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of what do I want to call them, ditches that were full of water, and so we'd go on patrol, and you go down one ditch and then it'd be over your head. So what we would have to do is have to use air mattresses and use them to be able to float across the ditch to get on the other side. We put our packs on the air mattress and try to go across. And either that or else we would have string a rope across, and then we would try to go across. We'd send our packs across, and then we would go tie ourselves to the rope, and then the guys on the other side would pull us across on the rope, as the water would be rushing by. And so it was pretty dangerous, It was a adventure,
Yeah.
I would like to mention right now that second-born children are typically the most adventurous of all the children. Usually, the second-born typically is the most adventurous. I'm a second-born. I have one brother that's older than me, so I'm second-born. So I'm much more adventurous than him. And my son Tom, you know him. He's the second-born.
Oh, yeah.
He's very adventurous. And I know you. You're the second-born, and I know you as being a very adventurous person too. We played a lot of 14ers together, and we did a lot of adventures together.
I never thought about that. My wife always says the second-born is always the one that takes care of the parents. They're the more nurturing towards the parents. So I don't know where those two jive, but normally she says that about my second-born daughter. She's like, remember, she's the one that's going to be taking care of you.
Yes, and I'll totally have to agree with it too. I really, from what I've observed, I'm 76 years old, and what I've observed that now I've studied the firstborn, I've studied the secondborn. Typically the firstborn are leaders,
Right.
They lead the rest of the kids in the family. They're usually the boss, and so they make good leaders. And I look at my brother. Me and my brother. My brother was an officer, and I was an NCO. My brother, he would, if I had men, I would have men under me, and then my brother would be in command of me and other squads. If it was an infantry squad. So
yeah,
it's very true in our life. So that's what most of my time in Vietnam was. And then in May, we got orders that we were going to go into the Ashaw Valley. And the Ashaw Valley is right along the DMC, demilitarized zone. It's on the border of North Vietnam and Laos. And the Ashaw Valley is probably, I would say, 5 miles wide at the widest area, and it's about 30 miles long. And the Ho Chi Minh goes straight through it. And the Ashaw Valley is the mountains to the east is the border of Laos and Vietnam. And so we patrolled along the Laotian border. 101st Airborne, our area of operation for the last 3 months of my time in Vietnam was in the Ashaw Valley. Now, during the monsoons, because of resupply, they had to get helicopters in to resupply us up in the mountains. And so we didn't stay in the mountains in the Ashaw Valley, and the valley between the two mountain ranges. There was two mountain ranges, and the valley was in the middle. They pulled us out during the monsoons because helicopters couldn't get in because the rain and the clouds were so low.
Yeah.
The mountains are in the clouds, so the helicopter couldn't fly, so they couldn't resupply us. So during monsoons, we would have to go back to the flatlands where, along the coast and in the rice paddy areas.
Yeah.
But the Asha Valley, the 10 major battles in Vietnam, my unit was in 2 of those battles. One of them was Hamburger Hill, the Battle of Hamburger Hill, and the other one was the last major battle in Vietnam, and that was Ripcord, the Battle of Ripcord. The first major battle in Vietnam was the Battle of Ai Drang Valley. This was the 1st Cavalry Division, which the movie The Band of Brothers, We Were Soldiers Once, the story I was talking about earlier with Mel Gibson. That was the first major battle in Vietnam. After that battle was over, most people back in the United States thought, oh, we've killed so many of the enemy in the Ai Drang Valley. It was such a great victory. The war won't last very long at all because North Vietnam won't be able to supply more troops. They'll run out of soldiers, and which was very wrong. They kept on just supplying, kept the war going on and kept on going on, for 10 years. And then in May of 1969, when we went into the Asha Valley, Hamburger Hill was the first major battle that we were in. And when we won that battle, well, we'll go back to Ai Drang Valley. Everybody in the United States was thinking that the war would be over soon. Well, Hamburger Hill, it had been like 5 years, 64 to 69, so that would be 5 years we'd been in the war, and we had another major battle, the Battle of Hamburger Hill, and it was a regiment of North Vietnamese that were on top of Hamburger Hill. It wasn't called Hamburger Hill. It was just on top of this mountain.
Yeah.
And let's say I can't remember the name of the mountain, but it was called the name of the mountain meant crouching giant. So that was the name of the mountain, what it means in Vietnam.
Wow.
So it was a regiment, about 6 to 800 NVA, and it was they were on top of a mountain, and they decided that they were going to fight to the death. And we knew we were on search and destroy missions, found out the enemy was there, and so 101st Airborne was there. Our mission was to find out where the North Vietnamese were and to destroy them, attack them and destroy them. And so that was our mission, and we did. It was a great victory for us. But after we took the hill, killed the enemy, we lost probably a couple hundred men wounded and killed like 680 of the enemy. So it was a great victory for us. But after we took the hill, it was just a hill, and then we left it. We left the hill. And so one of the soldiers, after the battle was over, he put a sign out. They call it Hamburger Hill because it was like a meat grinder going in there. It's like hamburger.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
many died.
I'm looking at a picture of Hamburger Hill now. Now, as you're talking, I was looking at Google Maps, and I was looking at there's a historical picture with a Chinook helicopter over this hill, and it's just totally deforested.
Yes, totally.
That's
It was just a bunch of fallen trees, and they bombed the mountain to where it was just sand and fallen trees, and after we took the hill, now my company was not in the battle of Hamburger Hill. We were support. We were reserves, and we operated all around Hamburger Hill. But the enemy was all over in that area. So the last 3 months of my tour was all around Hamburger Hill in the Ashaw Valley. So I got to see Hamburger Hill many times. And like you said, it was just a bald mountain with a bunch of trees down. It was just a bare mountain. So it was very odd where it was. So anytime we got on high ground, we could look over and see Hamburger Hill. And our operations, that's what we did. Helicopters would pick us up and we'd go and operate in an area, find the enemy, and try to destroy them. And then after a few days, the helicopters would pick us up, take us to another area, drop us off. And so that's what we did. We were in the Ashaw Valley 100 days. We went in with 115 men. And after the 100 days, there was 27 of us that were left that hadn't been wounded or killed.
Wow.
One of the 27 that hadn't been wounded or killed.
Wow.
You probably heard of the why me syndrome. Why did other guys get killed and not me? I didn't get a scratch. I've seen men decapitated, men blown to pieces. Had guys sitting next to me get shot. Men in my squad in position next to me. All three men get wounded. Or the whole time I was in the Ashaw, though, the 100 days I was there, I only lost one man killed. Most of the guys in my squad were wounded at one time or another. In fact, I can't think of one man in my squad that didn't get wounded one time. I'm the only one that I know of. I know another man in my squad. He got wounded twice in one day. He was wounded 3 times. And I never got a scratch. So I'll tell you about my experience of when I realized that there was a God. And I should have prepared. I would like to use scripture, and I neglected to look up some scripture to share with you. But looking back now, one piece of scripture that I can immediately comes to my mind, and I probably used it. This is my text when I spoke to you in the teen department. When David went to the camp where his brothers were, and Saul and the Israelites were fighting the Philistines, and Saul, David went to the camp to bring food to his brothers, and he told his brothers, "Is there not a cause?"
Is there not a cause? Yeah.
Yes, when Goliath was challenging the Israelites to send out somebody to fight me, and I'll fight them. And if the Israelite wins, the Philistines will serve you, and if the Philistines win, we will be your conquerors. And Saul would go out, I think it was 40 days, and he would challenge them. And nobody in Israel would take the challenge. Everybody was afraid of Goliath. Goliath would give the challenge, and nobody would answer the call. And David went to the camp, and he was taking food to give to his brothers, his older brothers, and he heard he heard Goliath challenge the Israelites. Send out a man to fight me. David said, "Is there not a cause?" David said, "I'll be the man. I'll go out, and I will fight."
Yeah, 1 Samuel 17.
Yes. And is there not a cause for America? That was when I was in Vietnam. I had a cause. My cause was to fight for my country. Whether I agreed with my government or not, I had a cause. My cause was to do my duty, and I was going to do it. And when I come to know that there was a true God, and I knew about God, was when one day the helicopters came to pick us up, and our operation was to go in this area where the enemy. The time was when I was in the Ashaw, we were in contact almost every day, either sniper fire or mortars. Now, North Vietnam didn't have artillery to fight us. They used mortars. Now, the only time they got to use artillery was when they were attacking a base camp, and they would take the artillery in the Ashaw Valley. And the only time they used artillery on us was the Battle of Ripcord, and that was my unit. After I came home from Vietnam, 6 months after I came home, the Battle of Ripcord. But it was a lot of the same guys in my squad were in the Battle of Ripcord. And it was where the enemy used artillery. They hauled artillery into the jungle, and they used these anti-aircraft guns to shoot at Fire Base Ripcord. And the 2nd and the 506, my battalion, were fighting the enemy, and there was approximately 500. Now, I wasn't there, but there was 500 of us at Fire Base Ripcord defending it, and there were 12,000 of the MBA that were attacking Fire Base Ripcord, and they had it surrounded. But going back to when I come to know that there was a God, we had gotten in that orders that we were going to helicopter into this area, and we were going to land on this ridge line at LZ landing zone, and we go single file, and I was going to be on the first helicopter, and my squad would be the first in, and so my squad would be on the first 2 helicopters. And the first helicopter goes in, you would always have a sergeant on the first helicopter because you have somebody in charge, a command position to be in charge on that first helicopter. And also, you had to have a radio and a radio man to go with that sergeant so that the sergeant could tell commander what was going on. Whether you're receiving fire or whether you're being attacked or being overrun or whatever, you had to have a radio, and there had to be a sergeant there. So that was my job. I was in charge. I was going to be on the first helicopter with my radio operator. Okay, so whenever we were in a combat assault, that's helicopters going in was called combat assault. So when we were in a combat assault, you'd always have a sergeant in the first helicopter and a radio operator with him, so that the sergeant would have a radio to be able to communicate with his commander about what's happening on the battlefield. You know, whether it's a hot LZ, whether you're taking fire, whether you're being overrun or whatever. So you could communicate with everybody. And so my squad was split in two. There was the first two helicopters would be my squad. So I was in the first helicopter. As the helicopters coming in to land, we're receiving fire, and you could hear the bullets hitting the helicopter. But the helicopter's flying fine. So they drop us off, and we make a perimeter, a circle, 5-man circle. And then the next helicopter comes in with the rest of my squad. So now we have 10 men. And so this is a company-size operation. So there's over 100 of us. So it takes a while for all of us to get on the ground. However, as the helicopters come in, they were not shooting at us on the ground. The enemy was trying to shoot down a helicopter. And
yeah.
They were shooting as they were coming in and leaving. So we were on the ground, but we didn't have anybody to shoot at. But we finally got our company on the ground. And then we started to move out. And you always have tactical advantage. In the mountains, you always travel along ridge lines. So our objective by evening was to set up our night defensive position on top of the mountain. And we were on a ridge line now going up to the top of the mountain. And you always, as you go up a ridge line, as you know, you live in the mountains. When you're on a ridge line, you have high ground in front of you, but on other three sides, it's low ground. So you have when you're moving up a mountain, that's the best tactical position to be in. Is you have the advantage on three sides. The only disadvantage you have is when you're going up the ridge line. You have to go uphill.
Sure.
So the enemy knew that, and so as we started moving up the ridge line, they were on the ridge, and they knew that we would have to come up that way, and so they would sit there, and snipers would sit and wait for the first man to come along and then shoot at him. And they would shoot at us, and then we would get down. We would drop our packs, and either a squad or a fire team, usually a squad, would maneuver around to the left or to the right, and we would try to outflank them and circle around and get behind the enemy and hopefully capture them or kill them. But they were not dumb either. They knew that they were probably just one or two men, and we were
a company.
A large group. Yeah, a company. Could be a company, or it could be 10 to 100 men. Just they didn't know.
Yeah.
And they knew that they were at a disadvantage, so they didn't stay around very long. They would shoot a couple of rounds at us, and then they would take off. And of course, they would take off higher up on the ridge line. And so then we would get to where they were, and they'd be long gone. And either that, or else we might find a couple of rounds where they shot at us, and they'd be long gone. So then we have to get in single file formation again, because we're going through the jungle and we're on this ridge line. So then we would have to move out, and we'd get a couple 100 yards, and then they'd shoot at us, and we'd get down and try to maneuver and get around them and This went on all afternoon, all day long. And then it was getting towards evening, and the company commander could see that we were not going to be able to make it to the top of the mountain. So he made a good tactical decision that we would set up our night defensive position on this knoll. It was not the top of the mountain, but it was high ground, and it was flat where the company could be there and we could defend ourselves pretty good. So by the time we got up there, it was dusk, and we got there and we started making a circle, going around, setting up our perimeter. And the way we did that, we would walk in a circle, single file, and since I was in the front, my squad would be front, so I'd have three positions. So I'd have the first three positions, and then the next squad would have the next three, and then the next three as we're coming around the circle until the circle met up with me. Then we knew that we were all in position.
Oh.
So,
and how big of an area would this circle be? Like, how big across would the circle be?
This circle is probably 30 yards in diameter.
Okay.
But each position, the positions are 10 yards at the most apart. I would say 8 yards apart, maybe 20, 25 feet apart, each position.
Gotcha.
And so we're all, the whole company's in position. And then our commander and our medic was in the middle of the perimeter. And we protected the commander, and he had all the major radios that he could call in artillery and airstrikes. And also the medic was there so that whoever needed a medic, the medic could go from the center of the circle. It was the best position for him to be in.
Gotcha.
What we didn't know was that this little knoll was actually an NBA base camp. It was their camp. And so they had foxholes dug around where these positions were. And they knew where all of our positions were because as we set up our position, I would be laying there, and right next to me there would be a foxhole.
Wow.
So we knew that the enemy knew where we were, but I knew that if we were attacked, the best place to get would be in that foxhole, because I'd have a little bit of protection in that foxhole. So by the time we got the whole company set up, it was totally pitch dark. And normally when you first start setting up your position, you would take your Claymore mine, which is an anti-personnel mine, and it was about the size of a small book. It would be maybe 6 inches wide and 4 inches high and about 2 inches thick, and it was just filled with all kinds of BBs, double-aught buckshot, and be explosive in it, and had little legs that you could stick in the ground. And so normally what we would do, as soon as we set up our position, we would crawl out in front of us, set up our Claymore mines, and they were anti-personnel mines. So you would set it up and you would face it towards the enemy. So as the enemy would come towards you, if they were charging towards you, if there was a mass attack, we could shoot our Claymore mine, and it would probably kill several of them if they were running towards you. Of course, in the jungle, it's pretty hard to run,
Yeah.
But that's a theory. But the only problem with the Claymore mine, it had a 100-foot back blast on it. So in other words, the back blast was 100 feet. If you were within that 100 feet, you could be injured. Um, there would be a ball of flame and it would come backwards also.
Yeah.
So what we would do to solve that, we would take our Claymore mine typically and sit it in front of a tree, and so the back blast would go into the tree so that it wouldn't come back and hurt us.
Yeah.
Our Claymore mine might be only 10 or 15 feet in front of us, but we would put it in front of a tree to protect us.
Sure.
But this night, we didn't even have time to set up our Claymore mines because it was already pitch dark. If you went out there, you don't know what was out there. You might never come back, or you might fall in a hole, or the enemy get you, or whatever. So we couldn't set out our Claymore mines. So as soon as we got in our positions, the enemy, we could hear the enemy probing our position. You could hear the brush crack. You lay there, and all of a sudden you hear a branch break, or the enemy would step on a sapling and it'd go pow, a big noise. And
Right.
whenever we heard those noises, we'd throw a Claymore, we would throw a hand grenade out there. And so this went on all night, and we were on 100% guard, alert, and we were laying there, and that went on all night. And just before dawn, the enemy attacked. They have what they call zapper squads. They have suicide squads. They would have men that would not carry weapons. They would just have a pair of shorts on, and they have like a carpenter's apron, and they would have explosives like TNT with a fuse, and you pull the string and the fuse would start burning, and then they would be like throwing sticks of dynamite, but only it was and they would try to get close enough to us to throw these explosives out and cause confusion so that injure us, so that we would panic, and so we would shoot at them, and then they would know where we were. And the main thing they were trying to get was the machine gun to shoot. If they could get the machine gun to start firing, then they know where the machine gun was, and they would attack the machine gun.
Sure.
Zapper squads were suicide, and they were just out to find out where we were, and to cause chaos. So that when they went out, it was suicide. They didn't expect to come back. They were giving their life so the rest of their enemy force could attack us. So they started probing our position, and they had crawled up that day. A new man came into my squad. I got a new man in my squad. In fact, I got two of them. One man's name was Lyle Lepke, and the other man was can't remember his name. Anyway, I had two new men in my squad, and Lyle Lepke was his first day in the field, and so when we got into just before we got into helicopters, I told him he would be in the helicopter with me, and we would land, and then as we moved out, he would be farther behind me as we went single file. So then when we got in our positions, he was on my position to my left, and then I had another position on my right, and there was four of us in my position where I was in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the enemy crawled up to his position, and they got close, and they threw a satchel charge into his foxhole, explosive into his foxhole, and blew off his left leg from the knee down and blew off
Oh,
his
man.
arm. And then wounded the other two men in his position also. So they were calling for a medic, and Lyle Lepke was down the bottom of the foxhole, wounded. But the other two men were calling for a medic. The medic came to my position. He come through calling to my position. Well, actually, he was walking my position. He got to my position and he crouched down next to me. He said, "Who's calling for a medic?" And I said, "Those guys in the position next to me." And about that time, the enemy, he was talking really loud. He wasn't afraid, apparently. But anyway, he was talking pretty loud, and I was down the foxhole, and I was looking up at him, and I was talking real soft so that the enemy couldn't hear me. And all of a sudden, the explosion landed right next to the medic. Boom, and went off, and he fell on top of me. And I was down in the foxhole. He was laying on top of me, and I pushed him off of me, and I looked up, and there was an enemy standing like 3 feet away from me, and there was a bank, and he had been crawled up the edge of the bank, and he was hiding behind the bank. And then when the medic, when he threw the satchel charge and blew the medic in on top of me, he stood up, and I brought my M16 up and went to shoot him. And when the medic fell on me, it had started raining that night, and the medic was on top of me. He pushed my M16 into the mud. I brought my gun up to shoot, and my gun was jammed.
Oh.
So the M16, there's a quick release that you hit it, and it puts a new round into the chamber, clears the chamber, puts a new round in it. And so I brought my gun up and I shot the man. I shot three times at him, and he fell over backwards over that bank. And then the medic woke up, and 43 years later, that medic called me on the telephone when we were at Tom's house in Winston-Salem, and he told me, he said, "Is this Ron Aguiar?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Is this the Ron Aguiar that was with Bravo Company, 2nd to 506, 101st Airborne?" I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Well, Ron, this is a man from your past many years ago. You probably don't even know who I am." And so I started calling off. I knew it was one of the guys in the company, and I told him, I says, I asked him if it was Tom, Jim Horn, and then I asked him if it was Al Lovelace, and I named off guys. And finally, I said, "Is this Tom Davis?" And it was the medic. And we started talking, and I told him, "You remember the night that Lyle Lepke was killed?" And he says, "How can I forget?" He said, "He was the first man I ever lost." And so now, back to the story.
Wow.
When the medic fell on top of me, he was unconscious. But when we were talking on the phone, he didn't know that he was unconscious. And I asked him, I said, "Do you remember back when you came over to help find out who was wounded? Do you remember when you were blown on top of me and you were unconscious?" He says, "No." And I says, "Yeah, you were unconscious." He said, "No, I wasn't unconscious." I said, "Yes, you were. You were just laying on top of me." And I says, "Do you remember when I shot that MDA?" And he says, "No." He says, "Really?" I says, "Yeah, I shot that guy that threw the satchel charge at you." He said, "Really?" He says, "I knew you guys always took care of us, because we knew that the medic, if we got hit, if we got injured, the medic was the guy that's going to probably save our life.
Right.
He was going to risk his life for us." He says, "No, I was unconscious." I said, "Yes." And I shot that guy. And then we went over and we pulled Lyle Lepke out of the foxhole. and he was wounded. And I said, "You remember that, don't you?" And he says, "Oh yeah, I remember that." He said, "Remember?" And I named the other two guys that were at the position. He says, "Yeah, I remember that." And I says, "Well, you were unconscious for about 10 seconds there." He says, "Really?" And I said, "Yep." And then on my position, there was a man. One of my men was behind me, and I thought he was in a foxhole also, but he was laying on the ground. So when after I shot that man, I took the medic's head, Tom Davis's head, and I pushed it down. And I looked in my lap, and that satchel charge was burning. That fuse was burning, and it was in my lap. My legs were underneath me, and that satchel charge was sitting right there, and it was burning. And I grabbed that satchel charge, and I threw it behind me. And as soon as I released it, it went off, and boom! And I got the big ringing in my ear. If you seen the movie Saving Private Ryan,
Right. Yeah.
he's on the beach and his ears are ringing, and that's what my ears were doing. I couldn't hear anything, and my ears were ringing. And then I shot the medic, but I didn't realize when I threw that satchel charge behind me, that guy behind me, his name is Al Lovelace. He was wounded twice that day, and one of them was as they were throwing the satchel charges at us. So I really think that I threw the satchel charge at him, and he got wounded. And
oh wow,
Patsy and I, probably 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, we stopped off his house, and we were talking about it. And I asked him, "You were in a foxhole, weren't you behind me?" And he says, "No, I was just laying on the ground." And I says, "Is that when you got wounded?" He said, "Yeah." So I'm pretty sure that when I threw that satchel charge behind me that was in my laps, I actually threw it at him, and he got wounded. He said that he got shrapnel in his rear end. Wasn't anything serious, but he did get shrapnel in his rear end.
Wow.
So we went over, we pulled Lyle Lepke out. We took him to the center of the perimeter where the company commander was, and he died 11 o'clock that morning. But after we took him to the perimeter, I went back to my foxhole, and it was just starting to turn daylight, just barely. I could see something down below me that was moving, and it was a white flash, and it reminded me of a white-tailed deer. When a white-tailed deer jumps, before they jump, they raise their tail. Their tail flashes, you can see the white of their tail, and that reminded me of what the white-tailed deer does. I seen something white flashing like that just in the it was just starting to turn dawn, and so I knew it wasn't natural. So I shot. I had seven. I only shot at that guy twice. He fell backwards, so I still had 18 rounds in my gun, and I shot all 18 rounds at that white thing that was flashing. So then later on, I was sitting there in my foxhole, and there was explosions go around, and I was looking out, and I could, as it turned daylight, I could see right in front of me was a ravine. It was a ditch. There was 2 enemy soldiers laying down the bottom of it, and it was 2 of the Zapper squad. 2 of the guys. One of them was wrapping a bandage around the arm of the other man. So I shot him in the elbow, and his partner was wrapping a bandage around his arm, and that's that white thing that I seen flashing.
Oh, so wow.
Shot both of them, and they both were moving their head back and forth, and so I put a new magazine in my gun, and I shot 20 rounds into both of them and killed them. And then we started getting mortared, and our company commander called an airstrike. Jets came in and dropped bombs, and then mortars came in, and then We had Cobra gunships working out close to us, shooting the enemy, shooting rockets and stuff, and there's all kinds of explosions going around. And then they started attacking us, and I was looking out in front of me, and I seen an MVA stand up, and he had an RPG on his shoulder, rocket propelled grenade on his shoulder, and he stood up and he stepped over a bush. As he stepped over, I shot him, and he fell forward. And I couldn't see him. He was behind that bush. But about 11 o'clock that morning, we finally pulled out after our battle with the enemy. We started pulling out. And all morning, I could see where he was crawling laterally to me to the left. He was crawling along that top of that ravine behind the bushes.
Uh-huh.
And I could see the bushes move. So I'd shoot at the base of the bush. I remember one time I could see his outline as he was crawling through the ground. I could see him, and so I shot 3 rounds at him. So I shot probably 40 rounds at him. Finally, before we moved out that morning, I was looking out where I thought he was. I anticipated I could see as the bush was moving. He was getting farther and farther to my left. But I knew where to look, and I was looking over there, and I seen him sit up. He leaned up against a tree, and he moved his head back and forth, and I shot him and killed him. And
wow.
That day we started moving out as a company, single file, going up a ridge. It was the same thing all over, deja vu. The enemy snipers start shooting at us, and we get down, and we maneuver around, and they were harassing us. And went on all day long. Then it was starting to get towards dusk. This time, our company commander made sure we set up our perimeter with plenty of daylight left. So we set up on this ridge line that was a good defensive position. And we set up our perimeter. And it started raining again, just like the night before. And we were laying there. And I started thinking, how close I come to dying that day. That satchel charge was sitting there burning in my lap between my legs.
Right.
And Andrew, if I would have died then, I would have went straight to hell because I didn't know God is my Savior. I didn't even know if there was a God. And that night, as I was laying in there in the rain, I started thinking about there had to be a God. I know there's a God. God saved me. He gave me another chance in life, and I was going to start serving him. And I made a typical foxhole conversion. I promised God that if he'd take me, allow me to go back to the States and see my mom again, I promised him that I would serve him. It was a foxhole conversion. I didn't really get saved. I didn't ask God to forgive me of my sins that come into my heart and save me and become my Lord and Savior. I didn't ask him that. I just asked him to save me. But I believed in him. I knew there was a God. And I remember that promise I made to him. And when I went back to the States, when I got out of the Army and my tour of duty, my 3 years was up. I went back to the States and joined the Lutheran Church with my mom. I wrote and told her about my experience and how close I come to dying. I knew that God had saved me, protected me, that I wanted to go to church when I came home. And she said, "Oh, great, I'll find a church for us to go to," because the only time we were Lutheran, but the only time we ever went to church was at Christmas and New Year's. We were regular attenders every Christmas, every I said New Year's, every Easter. Every Easter, dress up and go to church, and we were always in church at Christmas time. But that's the only time we ever went to church. And I didn't understand about Jesus Christ dying for my sins, dying on the cross. It wasn't until later that I was in a Baptist church and I bowed I heard the gospel and went forward in an invitation. I asked Jesus Christ to become my Lord and Savior. I knew then,
Amen.
if I were to die, I'd go to heaven. But I survived Vietnam. I went through Vietnam, and I was in other battles, and almost every day we were in battle, but I was never in another fight like that day. I killed 3 enemy that day, and I always wondered, would I be able to kill a man in cold blood? Would I be able to just shoot him? And when the enemy is there, and it's you're defending yourself and you're defending the men with you, the men that are with you are just like brothers. You're there to die for each other.
Yeah.
You're there to save each other, and we're there to try to make
Right.
it together. And we're willing to kill if we have to. I hated the Vietnamese. I went back to Vietnam in 2018. I went with my son Tom, and we went back to Vietnam. And I got to see the Vietnamese, and I was able to pass out gospel tracts. They were chick tracts that I passed out.
Wow.
And
Praise the Lord.
Yeah, praise the Lord. Vietnamese people would come up to me and they say, "Sir, you American?" And I'd say, "Yes." And they say, "You fight in the American War?" We call it Vietnam War. Well, they call it the American War. And I'd say yes, and then they'd stick out their hand, and they'd shake and say, "Oh, thank you. My father fought in South Vietnamese War, South Vietnamese Army. Oh, my father was Viet Cong. My brother was a soldier in South Vietnamese Army." And I remember one time specifically, Tom and I went to this vegetable stand and to buy vegetables, and we bought vegetables. Afterwards, Tom said, "Let's walk down the street." It was just a regular. It wasn't a main street; it was a side street. And he said, "Let's walk down the street, just see what we see." So we started walking down it, and I looked down the street, and there was this man riding the bicycle, coming towards me. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and we were looking eye to eye at each other. And he was riding his bike towards me, and I was walking towards him. And he got up to me, and he walked past me, and I said hi, and he said hi to me, and he rode past me, and then he stopped me. He said, "Sir," and I said, "Yes." He said, "Sir, are you American?" And I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "You American soldier?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You fight in the American War?" And I said, "Yes." And he stuck out his hand, and he said, "Thank you. My father, major in the South Vietnamese Army, he fought side by side by American soldier. American soldier gave his life to save my father's life. Thank you."
Wow.
So that made the whole trip to go back. And then I asked Tom after we were there for 2 weeks, and I asked Tom, I said, "Tom, what was the highlight of our 2 weeks in Vietnam?" He said, "Dad, without a doubt, the highlight of the tour was when we climbed Hamburger Hill. We got to the top, and you showed me. We looked out over the Ashaw Valley. We looked out, and you said, right there is Fire Base Ripcord, and over there is Fire Base Airborne." And then people came up and shook your hand, and he said, "It was like you were 21 years old again." He said, you were so alert. It was like you were a soldier, in Vietnam." He said, "I was so proud of you, Dad."
Wow.
He said, "Thank you for what you did, Dad. I can't imagine." He said, "The other thing, I can't imagine you guys climbing up that mountain with backpacks, 80 to 100 pounds in your back, attacking the enemy." And,
Yeah.
He said, I've heard about the jungle all my life. You've told me stories about the jungle, how bad it was, and about the triple canopy. You have one growth of trees that go up maybe 60 feet, and you have that canopy, and then 80 feet higher, you have the second canopy, and then 100 feet up, you have the third canopy. And when you're in a helicopter, you look down, you can't even see the ground. All you see is the treetops, you know. He says, you told me about the jungle and how thick it was. He said, I didn't realize that until as we were coming up the hill. He said, I couldn't imagine you having to go through the jungle, you know, how thick it was.
Seriously. I remember when we were packing out those elk back, I don't know, whatever year that was, 2016 or whatever it was. Do you remember that with Jeremy?
5 and 4x4, 2 bull elks, right?
2 bull elks, yeah. We were packing those out, and we each had 100 pounds on our back, but we had hip straps, and it was, 45 degrees and cool mountain air. And I remember looking up at you, and I said, you did this in the jungle, and with no hip straps, with worrying about people shooting at you. You're a beast. You all were beasts. All you guys doing that, and the guys, that do the more recent wars. But seriously,
well, I'll tell you, Andrew, you saying that, but it makes it all worth it for men like you. For how many times you've come back to me and told me, you always, on Veterans Day, you always contact me and tell me thank you for your service, and you've always held me in high esteem and really showed appreciation to me. And it's for guys like you that I was willing to do that. That's the reward of a year in Vietnam, was for men like you to be able to do it. Christians like you that are raising godly Christian families to honor God and bring glory to God,
Yeah. Well, and you, it's just like you said, honor and glory to God. How he had you go through all that to get your attention, and he worked that in his sovereign will. Obviously, like you said, whether you agree with the war or not, you felt it your duty, and you went and God got your attention, and you followed through on your foxhole conversion, and you sought the Lord. And the Bible says, draw near to God and he'll draw nigh to you. And he revealed himself to you, and you responded. And then you had a family of your own, and I remember praying for Tom when Tom was
excellent.
I don't know how to say, astray, whatever. And I remember the joy of getting to see Tom come back to the Lord, and of course now he's got a family, but you didn't stop there. You shared what was inside of you with the guys in the youth group. You were willing to go share your testimony in the youth group, and you'd always include us. Me and Daniel Trickstad, I remember specifically, but I know there's other guys, and it sounds like you're still doing it, going out with Jono. You were telling me before we started recording, you just went out with Jono, who's got, I think he's engaged now, and but you'd have me and Daniel up to stain your deck or chop firewood, good manly stuff, and you mentored us, and at least I view you as a mentor, and that's what really it is. I value that so much, because you could have gone through all that, and I don't fault guys who don't want to talk about it or anything, but they just it's not selfish necessarily. It's just how much more I value what you put into me. I know it took effort and stuff. You could have hired anybody to stain your deck, and I just appreciate you hiring me and Daniel and being willing to teach us a thing or two. And when we were sawing firewood and we were slacking off, you're telling, make sure you do a good job. You've been sitting long enough, giving us a hard time, and it was good for us. It was good for us. And I think it was, I don't know, but it's probably good for you too.
Yeah. And us doing the 14ers, we did several 14ers together. I remember coming down. I think it was Columbia. Was it Columbia or Harvard? And one of us lost our wallet. Was it you or was it me? That lost our wallet when we were sliding down the rocks. Remember? It
was you, I think.
On our behinds, and those the rocks were sliding. They were loose rocks.
Scree, yeah.
Yeah, it was scree, and we're sliding down. And then we climbed Belford and Missouri, Oxford,
Missouri.
Yeah.
We did several. We tried Shavano. I was with you on one of your many attempts to get Shavano.
Yeah.
And Belford, Oxford.
We did Shavano, but we kept on climbing Shavano, except the one time we went the wrong way.
That's the one I was with you on, was when we were we were on the wrong mountain. We followed the directions to a T, and then we got up and there's Shavano, half mile horizontal and 3,000 foot valley between us and that mountain.
Yeah, and it's almost sunset, and we got another 4 or 5 hours to go yet, or 6 hours to go to even get there.
Yep.
We smartly turned around.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was a good trip. I mean, it was a good trip for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was all for the glory of God. I talk about my Vietnam experience for the glory of God, not to bring honor to me, but to bring honor to God. Just like you said, an unbeliever. I was a typical American GI. I was a carouser, and I thought I was, John Wayne, and wanted to chase women. I was bashful and didn't do it, and thought I was the toughest guy on the mountain, and pretending like I was. But I can talk about that because what the miracle that God did with me. And, you were talking about mentoring you. Praise God, I'm still doing it today. I'm discipling a young man right now from Ethiopia. His name is Joseph Menden, and his brother's a doctor. He's a plastic surgeon, and there's 5 brothers. They all live together, and so I meet Mondays with Joseph. He's playing for the Colorado Springs Switchbacks. He's trying to make it in the professional soccer player.
Oh, okay.
So he's on. He played his last game Sunday, and hopefully he's going to be picked up by one of the professional teams. So we've been meeting on Monday. So I'm still mentoring.
Praise the Lord, and it really does give glory to God, brother. I like Paul said so many times in his letter, I thank my God, unceasingly at every remembrance of you. And that's the same type of thing. And I'd say the the mentorship is kind of like just pass it on, and I hope that I can do that at some point. With what God's given me, the unique experiences that God's given me. I've always wanted to do for others what you and others in my life have done for me in the terms of mentorship. And I'm getting, I'm 34 now. I'm getting there where it's kind of that time of my life, maybe not quite, but at least on some scale. But in terms of tying this into the liberty, obviously, if you can't extrapolate that out of your testimony, then then I think it's fairly obvious. But there's liberty takes sacrifice and all that. But then beyond that, don't keep it to yourself. Pass it on to the next generation.
Exactly right. As you were just talking now, you remind me of Joseph. Joseph was sold by his brothers, sold in slavery, and was worked in Potiphar's house, and then he was thrown in the Pharaoh's dungeon, and became the advisor of Europe, the number 2 man of Egypt, and then his brothers came to him, and how he was testing them and to see if they had changed, and he could see that they changed. And then when he revealed himself to his brothers and they realized who he was, they were scared. And he said, you meant it for bad, but God meant it for good.
Right.
What a tremendous, many things in our life that we could let them be bad, but God turns them into good. God made me the man that I am. I'm sitting here, Patsy's sitting with me. Patsy, and you know how faithful a wife she's been to me. And like you say, Tom was backslidden, and for a year and a half, and yet he met a wonderful wife, and God performed a miracle in his daughter, a real miracle, and she only weighed 12 ounces. And just a godly family. And Charlotte, she still goes knocking on doors and visitation every week. Her and Siobhan, Siobhan, don't you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they go visiting every Saturday, knocking on doors.
That's great.
The visitation pastor at the church. So I have a Filipino man that goes with me, and I'm mentoring him. He wants to go back to the Philippines. He wants to be a minister, but he's very shy, so he goes on visitation with me. Him and one of his sons. There, when they go on visitation, they bring their whole family on visitation.
Oh, wow.
So I let him bring one son at a time.
That's cool. Well, yeah, I know you're doing the. It'll have to be maybe. I don't know. Maybe we could have another conversation for the podcast at some time. But I'd love to hear more about some of your experiences doing the sidewalk counseling and with in front of the abortion centers and stuff. But honestly, I'm gonna have to wrap it up though. Was there anything else you wanted to share before we cut it off?
No, not at all. I'm going to be gone next week. I'm going to my brother's bird hunting, pheasant hunting in Kansas next week, but I'll be back afterwards. And if you'd like to, I don't know. This was awful long. I don't know how you're going to do it.
I think I'll just make it a Veterans Day special, and it'll be a long one, and people can listen to it in chunks. I mean, this is just a normal podcast for Joe Rogan. I don't know. I don't listen to Joe Rogan because I can't take the
Language?
long. Yeah, well, the language for one, but the long form podcast, because every podcast of his I think is 3 hours long. So
Oh my.
I can't hack it. But
Yeah.
every once in a while, someone I listen to will publish a long one, and I just listen to it as I can listen to it. That's the nice thing about podcasts. You just pick up where you left off. So, Ron, again, Veterans Day is tomorrow, isn't it?
Day
Right,
after tomorrow.
Friday, day after tomorrow, Saturday. Okay, that's right. Yeah, I knew I'd be traveling tomorrow, so we did it today. Well, anyway, I just wanted to thank you again for your service. Thank you for taking the time to share with me and my audience your testimony, your experiences, and I think it's valuable, and I know it'll be a blessing to someone. And again, I just want to say it's been an honor getting to sit here and listen to your story again, and God bless you. Love you, brother.
Love you too. I love your family. Love your parents. Love your wife. You got a wonderful family. Carry on, for God's glory.
Yes, sir.
You got a great grandpa.
Yeah, great grandpa too. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Praise God is all I gotta say, because I mean, he's not only is our God good, brother, but our God is good to me. But I'll go ahead and end the conversation. And so for all the listeners, thanks for sticking with us thus far. And like we said, liberty takes duty, liberty takes sacrifice, and also liberty takes passing it on to the next generation to be sustainable. So in the meantime, until next time, be sure and mind your liberty.